Hey there, this is the 10 out of 10 videos. So you should be super excited if you've made it this far, or if you haven't, feel free to go back and watch the other ones. If you're just kicking off with our data set and we're just talking about pivot tables, I would highly recommend at least going to watch a couple more of the other videos, just so you get a sense of what we're doing. If you're jumping right into pivot tables here, sure, it'll make sense. Sure, you can download the workbook that's in the description below and get the finished product of everything. But you also should know about some of the manual components that can go into your data set before you jump right into pivot tables. So that being said, pivot tables, you either love them or hate them. But there's a couple important things to note about pivot tables in order for them to work for you. And I think that's where most people get frustrated, is that they have errors in their data set that causes the pivot tables not to work. So let's jump into the components of a really good pivot table. As you all know, we're working from our sample dietary restrictions. Our last video kicked off with using the count formula to make this little summary of dietary restrictions. And your workbook probably still has some filtering going on in the registration workbook overview here on the master grid. So make sure that we take that off by selecting our entire thing and clicking on the filter icon to make sure that that's unchecked, so we have unmanipulated data here in our registration workbook. Now, when it comes to pivot tables, the most important thing to note is that there shouldn't be blank data in your pivot table. Again, if I'm scrolling through here and I see blank rows or blank columns, or if there's a gap in here, the pivot table is more than likely not going to work for you. We want to make sure that all of our data is filled out, even if it's with a placeholder or unknown, when it comes to email or whatever have you, but we don't want any blank information within our data set. There also shouldn't be multiple headers. So you can see that this is called the registration workbook, or workbook here as our header of this table here, but make sure that we don't have that selected when we're making pivot tables as well. If your data looks like mine, which it should, we want to highlight all of the information we want in the pivot table. So keep in mind, just like when we formatted the information as a table, it's asking us if our table has headers. Pivot tables kind of work the same way. So we're going to scroll to the bottom of our data set, since there's additional data on this worksheet. If it's just data that's on your worksheet without any headers or anything, you can do a quick Control-A to select all of that information. And then we're going to go to the Insert ribbon on the top, and we're going to click on Pivot Table. And what this is going to say is that we've selected a table, so we're going to name that table, which is Table 1, great. We want to create a pivot table into a new worksheet. And I would highly recommend always going into a new worksheet, just because you can continue to play with it then and not affect any of your original data. This is all we need to know for this, because we've selected a table of information and we don't have any sort of empty cells or additional information we want to tell Excel. All we need to do is press OK. Well, then we get this, and there's nothing usable on the screen, right? It says it's a pivot table. Yours probably says 1, because I've done this a couple times as an example for myself. And then we see a new sheet down here. So first thing I want to do is name this pivot table, just so there's clarity in my workbook. And then we're going to go into our pivot table options here. So we're not going to do anything in the actual worksheet. Everything that we're going to want to do when it comes to a pivot table is going to be over here in the pivot table fields. So we see we have filters, columns, rows, and values. I'm not going to get too complex, especially if this is your first time learning of a pivot table. We want to keep it simple. So the thing you need to know is that everything for the most part is going to be drag and drop on the screen. But first we need to have a question to answer. So let's say our question is, how many dietary restrictions do we have for our data set? So that's exactly what we did manually up here, is we added the count formula and summarized all of those. Well, guess what? There's a more streamlined way to do that with a pivot table. So first thing I want to do is, in the rows of my pivot table, is I'm going to drag and drop dietary restrictions. And you can see we have gluten-free, gluten-free dairy, halal, kosher, vegan, vegetarian. All of those pulled directly from the headers of that data set that I had. And then we want to add into the values the count of the dietary restrictions as well. And that's exactly what it labeled itself, count of dietary restrictions. And lo and behold, gluten-free, 193, gluten-free dairy-free, 23. We can go against this information just to cross-check that we have it all correct, but guess what? It is exactly the same as the manual information that we just put together. We have 500 total registrants, so we know that everyone is accounted for here, and this is the breakdown of those different dietary restrictions. Pretty cool, right? By simply creating that pivot table and dragging and dropping each of those values into the rows and columns, rows and values section, I've summarized exactly how many of each dietary restriction we have. Now, say we wanted just that Tuesday registration only, right? What if I add in attendee type to the filters? And I want to know just what my Tuesday only, that was in another column. Let's say it's just the booth staff or just employees. If I click on employee there, out of the employees, I have 80 people. I know for a fact that there are 80 employees registered in my registration list, and that 33 of them are gluten-free, 4 are gluten-free, dairy-free, and we get those counts with a simple click of that filter. Same rules apply as that formatting or that filter formatting. I want to select them all to get my total set. If I wanted to know just what my sponsors are, I'm going to unselect or just select the sponsors. We have 28 sponsors total. And so really easy way to start manipulating that data so that it's working for you and you're not manually summing up all of the information you're looking for or filtering through different types of header sections. So registration type is, I think, the one that I was looking for. So yes, this is where the Tuesday only is. I can do the same thing here. I can put Tuesday only. I know we have 2 of them and they're both gluten-free. Great. Pretty cool, right? So say we wanted to start breaking out this information a little bit more. If I drag an attendee type into the columns, look at what just happened. So we now have attendee type going across the top of our chart here, and we have our dietary restrictions going down the column itself. So we know for a fact that we have 224 attendees, that 83 of them are gluten-free. Booth staff is 24, employees are 80. So this is a snapshot of all of that useful information, including a grand total of all 500. So this gives us the spread of registration type. We can do the same thing if we wanted to do an attendee status, registered. All of them should be registered, great. We can do attendee type, or what was the other one, that registration type, Tuesday only. Keep in mind, this is the other filter that we have on here. So we want to make sure that all of these are selected. That grand total is what we're checking against. We know that our total value should be 500, otherwise something's amiss. And so this gives us attendee day pass, booth pass, so on and so forth, all the way down to that grand total of 500 to see our spread. So this is how a pivot table can be functional. Now we're just talking about dietary restrictions here, but keep in mind that this could be rooming stays, this could be registration or arrival dates, any of that information that you want to know summarized into that count is available in that pivot table. So the rule of thumb here, always start with a question that you're looking to answer. If I don't know what I'm looking for, I'm just going to start to drag and drop some of these things, and it's really easy to start making this pivot table unuseful. Like, why would I ever want a badge name? Because this is looking at the same data set that I've been looking at before, you know? So starting with a question, keeping it simple, and maybe reworking that same pivot table into multiple iterations is where it's going to start to get effective. Because sometimes the answer that you're looking for is as simple as putting 2 of those headers into your columns here. So we've covered a lot, and you've done a great job following this through. Hopefully you've been working on your workbook as we've been going through this, and you're walking away with some really tangible, useful information to use. If you have any questions, if you're interested in learning more, we are here at eGuide to help and support all of our clients, all of our partners. We work a lot in the events industry, so feel free to ping us if you're having registration issues, if you're having data manipulation issues. More than likely, we can probably work at it and solve that problem. Could be a little quicker than you just because we're so close to the information. So thank you for following along. Hopefully this was useful for you, and hopefully you are a little bit more empowered and confident in your Excel abilities. Feel free to save these, bookmark these, share these with your friends, and as always, we're here to help you. Core value number one is do something that helps someone. So thank you for following along. Until our next video series, whatever that may be, feel free to follow us on social media and subscribe to our newsletter, subscribe to our YouTube page, and we'll see you in the next round. Thanks so much.